Welcome to Serious Coin. I'm Kelly Willis Green, and this is the podcast where we have rich conversations about wealth. I can hardly believe we're already into season 7, and we're kicking it off with a really powerful episode. Not only our first in this new season, but also our first with video. So you can now watch us on YouTube as well as listen on your usual podcast platforms. But today we're talking about a side of wealth that often goes unseen. We're talking about the challenges that wealthy parents face in trying to raise grounded, motivated, and resilient children in an environment of tremendous financial privilege. And joining me is an expert on the topic, Jessica McGawley. She's the founder of Dallington, a London-based advisory firm. She and her team work with ultra-high net worth parents and their adolescent children to help them navigate the emotional, social, and identity-based complexities of having wealth. Jessica founded Dallington in 2016 as the first specialist mentorship practice for the rising generation. She has so many great stories and anecdotes and practical tips that I know parents will want to hear. I opened the conversation by asking Jessica to describe the most common concerns that she hears from wealthy parents. Have a listen.
So those sort of three main concerns that parents have in terms of raising children in the context of significant wealth are entitlement, motivation, and loneliness or isolation, whichever word you want to use. Going into those, so entitlement, that's a key one that everyone has, especially because a lot of first generation wealth creator parents didn't grow up obviously with the comforts that they're raising their children in. And they're really trying to balance this. How do I give my children the things I never had? Be that education and healthcare and security and, nice homes and holidays and those lovely things, but also teach them the value of the dollar, the pound, make them understand that the work that goes into receiving these, lovely privileges, that's a really tough one that they find. Then we have motivation, which is, again, if their life is too comfortable, are they ever going to get that sort of grit to go out there and really strive for what they want, work hard? And then the isolation piece is a tricky one. It's quite misunderstood, but actually it's a relatively small demographic if you're growing up in the context of mass affluence. And that's all fine and good when you're in school and nursery, because a lot of the parents and the other families you might be around might also come from very affluent families, or you're socializing with them, or you go to the same church or whatever. That changes when you get older and your social circle starts to widen, and maybe you go off to college or you start working and you realize that actually a lot of the people that you're around come from very different backgrounds from you, and you don't know how to really explain that. And I've got clients, the mentees, which is how we describe the young adults that we work with, who have not told some of their friends for years what their address is or where they go on holiday because they're embarrassed and they don't want to feel different. Because we have to remember, when you're a teenager or a 20-something, feeling belonging to your tribe of young people is so important, and you just don't want to feel like the outsider.
Exactly. And I would love, if we could, to look at each one of those three concerns. And if you could delve in a little bit more into how you help these families manage those risks, if you will. So the first one being entitled. And I think, as you say, you often see this with first generation wealthy. Somebody, catches lightning in a bottle. Suddenly they've got untold sums, and one of their primary concerns is, I don't want this to ruin my family, to, call into question our values. So how are you helping these families manage that very real challenge?
Well, very, very good question. And for years, I got it wrong. For years, I worked with the child, the teenager, the 20-something. The reality is, this is all down to the parenting. And as a parent myself, I know that. When I see a behavior in my children that I don't like, I'm usually to blame. So I say that with a lot of love and empathy, because frankly, all of us out there, we're just doing our best. We're just doing our best as parents. But when you see a really entitled teenager, first of all, let's be clear, being a teenager, regardless of your wealth, is an entitled stage of life. it's all about you. Okay.
It's how the brain is developing at that stage, right? The teenage brain is different.
Absolutely. It's all about you. They don't really care about the wider family and the greater system, as it were. They are very much focused on what's going on for them in their world, the changes that are happening for them, and that's fine. However, if I see a young person or a parent who says, my teenager just expects that these things are going to fall out of the sky for them, that if they drop out of this school, another one becomes available, if they want that new designer hoodie, they're going to get it. And I always say, well, how did that happen? Because the chances are they've learned that these things are options, that they are possible. Now, I don't say that to berate the parent by any means, but I do say it's really important at this point we take responsibility and we say, as parents, I wonder why we have maybe overgifted and allowed for this sort of behavior, and it's now on us to change it. So the first step with entitlement is not to shame your teenager or your 20-something. It's to say, you know, my love, I appreciate that I've been so busy. I've probably just given you a bit more to offset some of my guilt for not being here. That's not okay. That's not your fault. But I'm starting to see some behaviors that are not going to serve you. So that's not going to happen as much. You're going to have to earn these things, or these will only be gifts for special occasions or for special behavior, etc. But I don't want you to think I'm punishing you. I just want you to know this is going to change.
And that I love you. And that is part of what I want you in the world, right? It's interesting. So many places I want to go with this conversation. But part of that is, let's say they've taken that approach, or a family is very intentional about how they spend their money in accordance with their values. Maybe they even live modestly relative to their means. But the kid next door just got a Lamborghini for his 16th birthday. And I know mom and dad has the means. It's not a question of they can't, but it's a question of they won't. So in setting those boundaries and making those changes, or trying to raise grounded kids, you've got this environment around you where people aren't necessarily doing that. So how do parents have those conversations with their kids about the choices that they're making, and how do you help them?
So first of all, and again, much of what we're going to discuss is relevant for every family, but as we know, wealth is an amplifier. It just amps up what's already there, so we just have to take that into context. But different houses, different rules. And I encourage parents to say that from a young age. Doesn't matter what the next door are doing. That's their house. None of our business. We let them do what they want with their money. That's their choices. These are our choices. And when you get to an age where you are making more independent choices for yourself, those will be yours. But at this stage in your life, I'm trying to teach you the way that we do things here. So first of all, being very clear. Now, parents say they want to have grounded kids. And I always say, well, if you want grounded kids, you have to have grounded rules that stay the same. They don't, because as parents, so including myself, and I out myself a lot here because I'm to blame too. I get these things wrong. But we're reactive. You see your child behaving badly, you respond. They're upset. You want to comfort them and give them something to make them feel better. But being a teenager is the most reactive time of your life. You're up and down, as anyone listening to this knows who has teenagers. So it is our responsibility to stay calm, steady, and grounded in our house rules, or however you want to describe this. So I just make sure those things are reiterated. And you also, when we talk about that, what next door neighbours are doing, it's not to say that you can't also gift, but you're separating the gift from the character. For example, next door neighbours might have bought their kid a fancy car for their birthday, but did they say thank you? Do they clean the car themselves? Do they take care of it? Are they understanding how to tax the car, what the insurance costs? You can have both. You can gift and be responsible and grateful.
Of course, wealth can also influence our sense of who we are, particularly in the highly developmental teenage years. So I wanted Jessica's take on how she thinks being born into and raised with wealth can potentially impact a child's sense of self.
In terms of their identity growing up, it's so different depending on the generation. So, of course, if you're first generation wealth and you're the parent, you have most likely not grown up with this money, of course, and most likely you've actually created it from very little. So your identity with money is very different. If you've grown up alongside it, you don't know that this is different, unique, special, a privilege. When a first generation parent says to me, I don't understand why my child isn't so grateful for this private education they have. I would have killed to have gone to that school or that university. I say, but my love, they don't know that this is special because you've only ever shown them special. So it's really about showing them that the choices that they're making are unique, but they won't know if it all looks the same to them. So if their identity is growing up around other people who also have a lot of financial resources in private education, that will become ingrained in their identity. There is nothing wrong with that, but it's about explaining there is a wider demographic and world out there, especially if you're a first generation wealth creator and you want to bring some of that culture and those principles into your home.
Yes, in fact, I'll sometimes hear parents say, my kids are really fortunate, but they know they're fortunate. But I do wonder sometimes, what does that mean? What does knowing you're fortunate, or how does it or should it translate into behavior? To your point about these kids just, thinking that this is how life is because it's how life always has been for them and everyone in their circle. Do you encourage an opportunity for parents to help their kids see the broader world? And what are some of the more interesting ways you see parents doing that?
So number one is, and I know we've talked about this and you are also an advocate for it, but the importance of talking about failure and the journey that it took to get to this point for the parents, that they have the luxury to be able to say, we'll live in this house, we'll live in that country, being able to make choices like that at that speed and that ease has taken a long, hard graft. And if your child only sees the finished result, i.e. they only see the holiday, the house, the car, they don't see all the work that went up to being able to do that, they don't know that this was hard work. So I really encourage parents, in an age-appropriate way, of course, we don't want to overwhelm a child, let them have a childhood, but I would say around the age of 7 is a good age to start. You do start talking about how you grow up and what your house looked like in comparison. And maybe you lived in a 1-bedroom flat with your siblings in comparison to what they're growing up. If you can, take them to that neighborhood, take them to your first office, show them the commute you did, really help them engage in the fact that whilst this isn't your reality, this was mine, and this is what I worked for, and there were some amazing parts to this. It's really important that children of wealth do not think that the reality their parents came from was a bad one. Because in some instances, of course, that might be the case, but the majority of first generation ultra successful wealthy parents I know is that there is a lot of pride and joy in the background they came from. You want to try and hold on to some of that.
You talk about displaying the hard work and that went into creating wealth. You remind me a bit of a third generation heir said to me once. He was struggling to get launched, frankly, lacking motivation, according to his father. And his father was kind of threatening to turn off the money supply. And he said, growing up, I had the message that we're working so hard, we're building this wealth for the family. This is what we want for you, and we're creating all this for you. So he said, why now, as an adult, if that's how you show love, then why am I entitled for thinking that you're going to continue to provide for me? This is how creating wealth is how you are doing this for me. So why are you taking it away?
Well, I think that's a very fair point. I encourage parents to have, this is just a practical tool. From a young age, like with my kids, they have a give, spend, save box, for example. So it's like a little piggy bank and you have your 3 sections. So from a young age, you are learning how to divide your pocket money or whatever you've earned or been given into give. And give, that's philanthropy. That's I'm choosing to give this away. Spend, of course, I'm sweets or toys or whatever it may be. And then save is for that bigger prize in the eye that you have, but you're teaching them a little bit about money, including, very importantly, the give aspect. I think perspective is really important. I encourage every single one of my young adults that I work with and the parents to encourage them to work in a services job, a public service job at some point, even if it's just for a summer, to work as bar staff in a cafe, anything where you are dealing, where on the day-to-day, nobody knows who you are, you're dealing with the general public, you're dealing with, high pressured environments for relatively little pay, and working out, oh gosh, that's what I get at the end of the month after tax. Crikey. I have a lot more empathy for, those around me, probably also the people who work for my family and around my family or in the business. I think that's really important. And they all actually love it. I've had very few who actually didn't really enjoy the experience.
Fantastic. And I think the other thing that I say to people is your own behavior is one of the biggest teaching tools. And children
Absolutely.
are observing, they're overhearing. What is it you're doing? Setting up a giving jar or, a giving box for kids is an important step. So is perhaps giving yourself and talking about that and why we give and the joy of giving and who you give to and how you make those decisions. And again, not everybody does. The statistics around giving are pretty disappointing. I think I saw something the other day that a quarter of billionaires in the US have given less than $1 million of known giving, reported giving. So there's room to do work on that as well. So how you govern yourself, what you say about money, how you use your money is being watched.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point about it's the behavior that you are modeling, because your children are looking up to you. It's not what you say. It's not, your children will remember a feeling, not what you said when they were older. And some of the, to give an example, one of the sort of happiest, most content families I've ever worked with was a British billionaire family. And from a very young age, the children were encouraged to go to a local school, which was an academy school, which are well known in the UK for having at some point had challenges and being in a low income demographic area. And they saw where their money was going, and they saw over the years how young people their age were progressing and how opportunities were opening up for them, and how a student who would never been able to think about going to Oxford or Cambridge was now getting that opportunity because their money was going towards extra tuition and funding and support. So I think that's a really, really good point.
Excellent example. Thanks for that. I want to talk about a different situation where, going back to the theme of belonging, sometimes I see this in my coaching practice. Sometimes people will grow up as the wealthiest family in a very small town or wealthiest family in a blue collar city. And they're made to feel different because of having privilege, of course. But to our earlier point, kids will go to great lengths to hide things because they want to fit in. And you don't want to encourage a sense of inauthenticity or deceit, but at the same time, parents and their kids are trying to navigate this real difference. So what should a parent say or do to help children swim in those waters?
So first off, I think it's a really tough one. And again, I'm sure I fail at this all the time as a parent, but we must never, ever lie to our children, including white lies. It's really hard because sometimes you want to protect them and you think that's the right thing to do. But really what you're teaching them by lying about your status or about, the money you have in your account and your net worth is that there's something to be ashamed of. So if you're most secrets aren't positive. Most, not all, but most. So you're teaching from a young age, hide that. Don't be authentic. Let's keep this under the radar. There is a way to manage these things at the same time, which is this is the honest reality. These are the facts. This, on the other hand, is how we handle it. This is how we practice those conversations. If someone says something rude to you, which they will, it's not an if, it's a when. And if someone assumes something about you based on your net worth or who your parents are, this is how we handle it. Now, I've learned over the years that really varies from culture and nationality. So it really is a personal discussion, and and I would help each family. But for example, some of the Southeast Asian families I have, their approach is you do not have to explain yourself. This is something we keep private. You're never rude, but this is not something that you entertain. Whereas another family, you're not denying your wealth, but you're not having to explain yourself. Whereas some other families or North American families I've worked with, they've worked out their script. They've worked out their quick response, which is, no, you're right. Yeah, my dad is that person. My mother is the heir of, etc. I've been really very privileged, but I'm also my own person, and I'm just like you. I'm trying to work out, who I want to be.
Yes, and I get my feelings hurt, and I want to be loved like anyone else. The piece that gets
and if they respond badly to that, that's on them.
Yeah. How do you help parents work out the lifestyle choices for themselves? So obviously with their wealth, they can afford to make life more comfortable for themselves and more enjoyable. But those choices impact their children. And you mentioned that second concern was getting too comfortable and lacking motivation. And I wonder, just let's use the example of flying private. That's a great luxury. And children who fly, I remember being told the story of one family that used to fly private, and then there was a change in circumstances. They began flying commercial, and the 6-year-old got on the plane and said, "Dad, who are all these people?" It's that's a fix. How do you help people make those decisions? And if so, and what conversations should they have about those decisions with their kids?
Okay, so first of all, I think it's important to detangle what the parents' decisions are and the ones that are the family. So as parents, as a couple, or as individuals, what they want to do and how they spend their money privately, be that on their business time, independently, is their choice. And if they choose to always fly private or first class or dine in the best restaurants, as far as I'm concerned, they've earned the right. That's their money. That's their choice. When they're flying, though, as a family, they're modeling something. And I would always argue it's really important to have a balance, because just to use the example you just gave, there is nothing certain in life but uncertainty. And we can never be sure that whilst you're here today, you'll be there tomorrow. So if you are not showing your children coach exists, and actually it can be pretty fun, and there are all of these other ways to, to live and to have a lovely lifestyle that don't include a lot of money, that's a failure. So I would say it's about the balance. What I've also seen, though, is defy me to take a 10-year-old, a 5-year-old on a bus or a tube and they not love it. They actually don't love private. They really want to be amongst it. They love machines. They want to see a bus conductor with his hat and his tannoy. That's, let them have those experiences. You're not shielding them from anything. In addition to flying coach, Jessica says teenagers should be encouraged to book the flights themselves, figure out what insurance they need, and enter their own passport information. Pretty simple tasks, but the idea of doing these things yourself in many of these families is a bit of an anomaly. Jessica explains why. A lot of families that I've worked with, there is either somebody, it might be their parent, it might be the assistant, it might be the family office, but there are lots of people who are readily available to make life easier for them. Wonderful. But we mustn't do that for the rising generation. They need to be given the opportunity to take on these day-to-day tasks, get them wrong, and learn from them. So going back to what you said earlier about you coach the parents as well as the young generation. Are you having to kind of redo the parenting script and style, and not entirely, but to a very large degree with these people? Well, I wouldn't say that much, because I know this isn't what you're saying, but I have the greatest respect for the parents I work with, because many of them really have been building, certainly if they're first generation, they've been building this business for a very long time. And the reality is they've probably only just turned the dial in terms of that success in the last, whilst their children are, 10 and upwards, they were still building it when they were younger. So they've got to the point where their children are looking to them for these sorts of behaviors and decisions regarding money. And suddenly they've come into the money and they have it and they want to spend it. And quite rightfully, they've worked for it. That's the time to slow down. That's the time to regroup, get around the table together and go, okay, what's the plan here? By the time our child goes off to college or goes off to work or leaves this house, how do we want them to think about money? How do we want to think about wealth? Very important. There is a difference between money and wealth. We want them to know that. Money is a number. You can count it, measure it, track it. There are people to help you grow it and protect it for you. Wealth, of course, people with money feel wealthy, but I would argue wealth is far more philosophical, and it's up to the individual to decide what feeling truly wealthy is. Now, if you have created the money yourself, that mass money, the chances are money and wealth are linked. But for your child, the process of understanding what wealth means to them, be that freedom, health, relationships, that's a worthwhile endeavor. But back to your point about the reparenting script per se, there are just lots of really everyday common things that parents can do to help their kids. And it is really simple. It's things like letting them make a mistake. Don't swoop in with a safety net. Let them fix it. Of course, if there's a real genuine issue, jump in. But far too many of us, especially millennial parents, have learned to jump in with our safety nets. We've got to slow down to really empower our children to fix their own problems more and more.
The third aspect you mentioned was the sense of isolation. And I know that, you'll speak to that in detail, I hope, but the incidence of anxiety and depression among affluent children is astronomical. And I think in part owing to that isolation, among other factors. But can you elaborate on that third concern that parents have?
So let me start with this, which is across the world, if you're born into any demographic, be that economic, or you're born into particularly a religious family or a different nationality, a race, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the difference is. If you have been born into it, that's not your choice. And generally, there can be empathy for it if it's not something you feel at home in. That is not the same of children of wealth. It is one of the differences in the world that people have generally very little empathy and understanding for. If you're a child who's grown up, with very, very wealthy parents in a very comfortable lifestyle, and it doesn't feel right to you, and you feel lonely or depressed or anxious, and we can go into those reasons, the outside world is not saying, poor you, this must be a unique way to grow up, and I don't have any understanding what that's like, and I can at least have some empathy from the outside. No, it's the opposite. It's, how dare you? How dare you be upset? Look at what you have. Most people would kill to be in your position.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have to start there by saying growing up today in this modern world is tough for most young people. If you then add that lens on where the outside world is saying, we don't want to hear you complain, we don't want to hear the fact that you're upset or low or struggling, that adds a huge layer on. And that's when the isolation comes in, because you learn quite quickly, this isn't wanted. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I'm not going to complain, but I'm just going to go in on myself.
Yes. And I wonder too, sometimes it is the lifestyle choices of the parents that isolates children physically from the rest of the world. You can create your own compound now. And I remember I interviewed Clay Cockrell, a wealth psychologist, for my podcast a few seasons ago, and he talked about a client who sort of bragged to him that he said, no one can get to me.
I've got so many layers of protection. And Clay said, well, that's interesting, but it's probably not very healthy. And so if the parents are living a life like that, a child growing up in that is by definition isolated from the rest of the world.
Absolutely. So the compound one is real, because I've seen it with my clients when they live in very sort of isolated, restricted, separate, physically separate domains. Absolutely, that's really tough. I've also seen it when families, even in the short time that I might have worked with them, have gone from living in a relatively big house to an absolute mansion, and mum and dad haven't seen their child all day because the house is so physically big that they need an intercom to know whether or not they're even in the building. Now, that might look great on the outside, but the reality is the physical proximity of being near your kids and seeing, oh, has he washed today? Have they eaten? Are they up? Did they go to school? That's really important. And so it's something to consider. Bigger is not always better, and I always try and encourage parents at that. Then we have the added travel aspect, which is so many of the families that I know you and I work with are international. They would, whilst they have their sort of their country of origin that they're very proud of, they are international citizens of the world. They have houses and passports for multiple countries, and as a result, that's wonderful. Maybe when you're an adult and you've got your long-term friendships and those they're established. When you're 16, all you want is to be with your group of people and be with them every day. You do not want to be ripped from them next term because mum or dad needs to go to another country. And what I've learned is that whilst those young people can be very resilient in some ways, they can pick up, land in a new place, settle into a new school, get on with a different curriculum, different language, different currency. When it comes to friendships, they learn it's not safe or it's not worthwhile me putting my effort into making new friendships because I'm going to leave in 6 to 9 months. Mm-hmm. So that, and I'm giving quite a rare example. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does exist and it's really tough for them.
I've actually heard that from adults who are expats who find it hard to make friends. And you can understand that the community says, well, I know you're going to be gone in 3 years because this is, just a stint. We're not going to invest. So I can see how that is definitely the case. Let's look, I'd like to shift and hear from the next generation perspective now. I've been asking you all about the parents and their concerns. What do these teenagers and young adults tell you about the challenges and privileges of their situation?
They're acutely aware of it, and it falls into typically one of two categories. They're acutely aware of it and they are grateful for it. And that will have a lot to do with their parenting and their upbringing and, as we've talked about. Or they're acutely aware of it and they are, careful to use my language here, but they are disgruntled to say the least. They feel that they are shamed for growing up in this lifestyle, and that actually when we live in such a public society where anyone can find out who you are at the drop of a, it's not like even 20 years ago going off to college. The young people I work with turn up on their first day of term and within 5 hours, everyone knows who they are. They know who their parents are. They know their surname. They know what their net worth is. You don't know if your new best friend is your best friend because of you or because of who you are and what you might be able to give them access to. And so they find it really challenging. But the best thing they can do is say that, because when they suppress it, that's when it becomes sinister. So a lot of our work here at Dallington, especially the group work when we get them together, is to say, you know what, this is a genuine safe space because you are all in the same position here to say, God, aren't we lucky on one hand, but crikey, there are some challenges that come with this. And let's talk about those, because if we can acknowledge them and process them and work through them, then we can focus on the good stuff.
And again, are there scripts for some of these challenges? Do they brainstorm solutions together? I've tried this and it works for me, or how does that happen?
Yeah, so I find it's really helpful, most specifically around job interviews, relationships, new girlfriend, new boyfriend, or friendships. So for example, there was a good one that one of my young female mentees told another one recently. She said she went on a first date and she really liked the guy, but she wasn't entirely sure what his intentions were, sorry. And so she said to him, if you won the lottery tomorrow, like, what would you do with it? And she didn't know if he knew who she was. And he said, I'd quit this tomorrow. I'd get my yacht. I'd chill. I'd live the life. And she was like, okay, he's not for me. Because the minute he finds out who I am, he's won the lottery.
Mm-hmm.
But when she did it with a date a few weeks later, he said, well, I'd be so relieved to know that money maybe was no longer a fear for me and it wasn't something I had to be scared about. But at the same time, it would allow me to choose my passion and my purpose more. And I would go into education because that's something that doesn't pay particularly well, but I really care about it. And she loved that.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was just a tip that they gave each other.
Yeah. The parents that come to Dallington and work with you and your team, it sounds like there's a little bit self-selection. They're already concerned about raising grounded kids. People who maybe don't come either aren't or aren't worried about does everybody want to raise grounded kids? I mean, is it an aim for everybody? Probably not.
No, not everyone does. And frankly, not everyone is at all worried about the consequences of having mass wealth. Some are incredibly proud of it, and that's okay, but they have not considered in any way, shape or form that there could be any downside to growing up with wealth, because they worked really hard. So why on earth would the next generation be concerned about this? They are living the life. And the big challenge I make with parents who do take that stance is when they say things like, I do all of this for them. I work so hard for them. This is all for them. I would always challenge that and say, it's not. This is for you. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you didn't have children, you would still work like this. You would still want to create wealth like this, and you would still want status. And then they agree. No parent, no family is going to get on with me or the Dallington team in our way if everybody can't take some responsibility. If I have a family come to me and they say, my child is the problem, fix them, then we have a problem, because the problem is then the parent. Yeah. If they come to me and they say, we're really, we're just trying to navigate this. We know that we have either recently come into some wealth, we're about to, or this is our reality. And we know there are some great privileges, but really, really want our child to also forge their own path, to be as independent as the average person and as happy as the average person. What do we need to consider? Wonderful, because they're being, important word, curious. They're able to just go, exactly. I don't know the answers, but I want to know, and I accept my role in finding out.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. How do you know when you've been successful with a family?
What success looks like is that the family are better connected. They have better conversations at home in their family domain about human family related issues. Some of that will be wealth. Some of that will be money. Some of that will be just everyday normal challenges. But the young adult understands their unique perspective and unique position in the world. They've processed it. They have accepted it. And then they can move forward like any young person.
Could you talk a little bit about the program that each family goes through?
Of course. So our average family is with us for about 18 months. And we start off for about 3 months assessing. And that might sound like a very long amount of time. But in my experience, the longer you spend and the more thorough you are in really establishing what the key challenges are, then the work, the core bit, or the treatment as you might put it, is so much easier and so much more straightforward. That means lots of meetings and interviews and time spent with both the parents and the young adult. And if there are any other people who might be in the system, that could be tutors, psychiatrists, therapists, coaches. It's important to understand that, these families have those extra people in their system. That might not be normal for the average family, but these do, and they will have an influence. So we want to get that whole perspective. Then we have our curriculum. There are 12 modules, and they range from very practical life skills that every young person should have when it comes to financial budgeting and understanding how to make decisions and have difficult conversations, but it's also things that are unique to them. For example, what does it mean to be a beneficiary? Every single one of my clients is a beneficiary, but none of them know what that means when we start with them. They also need to understand how to respond when people are negative or rude about them based on their unique position in the world. They also have to understand security and reputation, because unfortunately they don't have the luxury of being able to grow up without a lens on them.
Well, it's such important work, and you really have such tremendous depth and expertise and a real niche. So thank you for doing the work, and thank you for doing this podcast with me. Before we wrap up, I have just a couple more questions for you, more personal reflections that I always love to get my guests' perspective on their own relationship and views on money. So if you'll play along with me.
Absolutely.
First question is, where did you learn about money, or what early money messages do you remember from your own family of origin?
So my early money messages were probably quite similar to a lot of my clients, which is I just saw the end result. I didn't see the process or where it had started from. I saw the nice house and the nice holiday and the private school, and I didn't have a great understanding or probably a great amount of gratitude for the life that I was able to live, because I didn't see where it was coming from. And I came from a more traditional house in the respect that, my dad was the one out working, traveling a lot, and mum was home. And so I just thought also being a man was where the money came from. And it was a very male dominated or male centric way of, money equals man, basically.
When did that change for you?
That changed for me quite young, actually. It started when I first started working. And I worked from a young age. This is something my parents did help instill. I started my first summer job when I was 14, and I'd pretty much worked ever since then. And when I started to get those paychecks, I knew that I could make decisions even if they went against my parents. So if they said, we want you to come here for the weekend, I would say, I can't, I've got to work. And I will choose what I do with that money. And I thought, brilliant, money equals choice. And I can control how much of that I have.
Well, that's great. You've just answered the other question I often ask. To me, money is. So for you, it's choice.
Money is choice.
What is one thing you would say most people are surprised to discover when they come into wealth?
That not everything is better.
A huge thank you to Jessica McGawley for an insightful and generous conversation. I always love talking to her. And talking to Jessica does remind us all that yes, wealth can open doors for children, but it can also bring its own quiet pressures for the children and their parents. If you'd like to hear more from Jessica or learn about her work, you can find her at dallingtonassociates.com or follow her on LinkedIn. They produce great content, so I encourage you to take a look. And as always, thanks for listening to Serious Coin. If this episode resonated with you, do share it with a friend or leave a review. It helps the right people discover these conversations. And as well, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the other episodes coming up in season 7. I'm Kelly Willis Green. Thanks for joining me, and see you next time.
Serious Coin is provided for your general interest only, and nothing we discuss should be taken as investment, tax, legal, or professional advice. Always talk to a licensed professional before you make any financial decision.